I'm talking to you all today here from Reeseville, which is about 7 kilometres west of Maleny, about 500 metres altitude on the western edge of the Blackall Range. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners. It's Jinnaburra country and Gubbi Gubbi country, not too far to the west of us, just a kilometre or two away. So I see it's very much within the overlapping zone. My name's Spencer Shaw. I was born in the UK in 1969. I've been in Australia since 1977. I was quite resentful at first of being dragged all the way to Australia from the industrial dreariness of northern England, just outside of Manchester. But I've grown to love it over the years. It's seeped into my system. I've been in southeast Queensland since 1981. And between Bribie Island and Maleny, I call both those places my home. Both very special bits of country. We've been up in Maleny since about 92. I quite like moving to Maleny from an ecological restoration point of view, because all the work of destroying the rainforest has already been done, and so everything we did from this point forward was pretty positive in trying to put it back again. It's a bit of a twisted way of looking at it, but it's good for your head that you're in a place that's actually getting better rather than worse. As some of those stats were showing before, things are getting a lot worse out there. But I guess up here we're showing that you can make things better, because we've already been in that really bad place and bringing it back from there. About 20 odd years ago, we started a business called Brush Turkey Enterprises, focusing on rainforest seed collection and supplying that to nurseries. From that, pretty quickly went to ecological restoration as far as bush regeneration went, recognising seedlings and then applying that with weed control to favour those seedlings. Also in nurseries, we've got at our property here, we've got our wholesale nursery, Brush Turkey Enterprises, and we also run a retail nursery in Maleny called Forest Heart Eco Nursery, where we focus on local native plants, native plant cultivars, and fruit trees and vegetables, which everybody's going through vegetable seedlings like crazy at the moment, so we can't keep up with the demand. So there's some possibly good cultural changes coming along there. A lot of the big picture stuff's been discussed. I'd like to just give you some figures for the Sunshine Coast. The Sunshine Coast Biodiversity Strategy gives us about 1,600 native plants on the Sunshine Coast. Within the bioregion of southeast Queensland, that goes to about 3,500. We've got the whole overlap zone going on that's already been discussed, but about 1,600 native plants. But I want to zoom in on is something a little bit more local, something I'm very familiar with and have spent a lot of time in there, particularly recently, and that's Mary Cairncross Scenic Reserve. So what I'm going to attempt to do now is share with you a presentation. So I'm going to press share screen. It shows it there. It's working really well.
Yep.
Share.
Well done.
Now, from the beginning, oh, look at that. Looks like a pro first go, but we're on it. So let's try and see if we can flick through that nicely. So Mary Cairncross Scenic Reserve, an island of biodiversity. So where is Mary Cairncross? You're looking at the southern end of the Blackall Range there, and all that pale green stuff is kikuyu, basically. All that grey stuff is houses and roads, and the dark green stuff is rainforest, and there's not much left. All the stuff that you generally are seeing there is on the slopes around the edges, but the big cleared area is all the flat stuff on the top. And Mary Cairncross is one of the few little bits of rainforest left on top of the plateau. So where is Mary Cairncross? Mary Cairncross is there in that bottom, my right-hand corner. I'm assuming you guys have seen it the same way around as well. So there's Mary Cairncross. You can see Maleny's just to pretty much in the centre of the picture there, the Maleny Township itself. So that's the little bit of Mary Cairncross that's left. That really windy line running sort of through the middle there is the Obi Obi, which flows into the Mary River. So Mary Cairncross is a unique patch of remnant rainforest, a small remnant of the type of rainforest that covered the basalt soils at the southern end of the Blackall Range. We've got it up over 391 plant species have been recorded there. Don't get too excited yet though, because nearly 100 of them are non-local natives or exotics. So 299, I think I've just recently pushed it to 300. with some more survey work I've been doing in there. But we have 299 currently acknowledged indigenous native plants growing in that area. That's not by far the biggest diversity. We do have patches of rainforest around the range, even smaller, but containing up to 400 species. Slightly more diversity of ecosystems within them. We've only got really 3 major ecosystems in, probably even 2 ecosystems truly in Mary Cairncross. So that's probably what's keeping those numbers down. But as for anybody who's been for a walk in there, it's an absolutely amazing place and gives you a good connection to the rainforests of southeast Queensland. There's a variety of habitats: rainforest, eucalypt forest and wetlands. You're mainly seeing the rainforest on the tracks in there, but there is a lot of other stuff in there. It's one of the largest patches of subtropical rainforest at this altitude in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. It's 55 hectares or 137.5 acres. And there's a small block that's still worth talking about, 4.5 hectares just to the east of it. It's the only patch of rainforest on that basalt plateau, on the top of the plateau on the south end of the Blackall Range. It's the only patch of Eucalyptus robusta wetland at this altitude in southeast Queensland. I don't know where that squiggly marks just come from. That's interesting. So right in the middle of Mary Cairncross there, we've got 2 different ecosystems I'm just giving you some pictures of. The top one is the rainforest type ecosystem. The bottom one is the Eucalyptus robusta system, which you don't see when you walk in there. It's on the eastern side. It's quite inaccessible, and I think we should keep it that way because it's quite a unique system hidden away there. 2 of the big differences, a few big differences you might notice between those types of forest. Rainforest at the top, probably every single one of those trees that you see there, as small as they are, would be a different species. Down the bottom, it's probably just one species, Eucalyptus robusta. In the top photo, there's virtually nil understory plants and very little diversity. In the lower picture of the Eucalyptus robusta, there's lots of ground cover, and that's where all the diversity is, in the understory. That's a good breakdown between rainforest and sclerophyll systems. Usually in the sclerophyll systems, the diversity is in the understory. And there's also that big light level difference between the eucalyptus and the rainforest as well, much more open canopy. There's the regional ecosystem mapping. The bulk of Mary Cairncross is not of concern. As of one of the prominent botanists of our state, Bill McDonald, has been quoted as saying, Mary Cairncross is a victim of its size as far as being, it should be mapped as a much more significant patch of vegetation, but it's not, because it's linked in with a whole heap of more larger areas to the south of here. But it's quite unique at this particular altitude and the species mix that we have in there. That little pink line running through the middle is the endangered gallery rainforest. That's not really there, but we'll keep that anyway. It's mainly picker-bean palms along in a swampy area. And the 1234 down the bottom is the Eucalyptus robusta swamp. That gives you a good idea of where it sits on that eastern side there. There's a bit of an image of the health of Mary Cairncross. And that's an assessment of the vegetation, of how it's regenerating and where the weeds are, if there are any weeds. The dark green stuff is all without weeds. The slightly lighter green stuff, then that's excellent. The slightly lighter green stuff is very good. So the bulk of the reserve is in a really good condition. And this was back in 2011, and things have improved since then even. And on the eastern side, you might see a little bit of good, and that's quite obvious that it's close to suburbia, and unfortunately that's the whole classic of chucking things over your back fence and then becoming weeds in the adjacent rainforest reserve, and that's very much what had happened there. But a lot of that has been cleaned up. The vast majority of Mary Cairncross would be in a very good condition now. There's a little bit of revegetation on the western side, and hopefully soon to start there'll be a lot more revegetation on those blocks to the north there, because council's recently acquired them. Mary Cairncross, the island, it's a tiny remnant, less than 1% of the subtropical rainforest that once covered the Blackall Range. It's very much a fragmented landscape now, so we're potentially losing species down the track if we don't do anything about it, even if they're present there at the moment. The threats are isolation. One One of the things that we see very quickly in fragmented ecosystems is the animals disappear, but it can take a lot longer for the plants to disappear because they have much longer life cycles, and they might be present, but they're not reproducing anymore. And that's very much what can be happening a lot in. We see that with quite a few species in there, and I'm working on a survey of that sort of stuff I've been studying in Mary Cancross, which will help pinpoint some of those species that just aren't popping up anymore. The threats that have been very much there in the past include weeds, feral animals, even domestic animals, even neighbourhood pigs have been known to escape into there. And it's only a tiny little reserve to have things like that happening, and neighbours' cats running in can have pretty major impacts on what this tiny little fragment that we've left. We need to preserve it as much as we can. There's that big loss of ecosystem function when we lose the fauna, which might be pollinators and dispersers, which very much links back to the dispersal of the, or, actual pollination of the trees to get to produce fruit in the first place, and then to be dispersed afterwards. And of course, there's the fungi linking this all together, which I don't touch on anywhere near enough, but maybe one down the track. What I'd like to start on is some of the species that are threatened or endangered in Mary Cancross. And the first one is, I've got about 7 or 8 for you. The first one is Coronia. This is the host for the pink underwing moth, which the only recorded breeding place for it maybe a decade or so back was Mary Cancross. It's a listed, it's one of the few listed invertebrates, along with things like the Richmond birdwing is the pink underwing moth, and this is its host plant. It's a vine that's quite prolific, and we did, with this survey that we've just recently done was 28 plots. It was probably in every single plot. So it's quite interesting. Some of these threatened plants are quite prolific in their numbers in this reserve. But again, I'll bring you back to the fact that the reserve is about 1% of the rainforests that were there, which were probably quite a small patch of rainforest as it was. This is the thready bark myrtle, Gossyenta flowea. You can see the stunning colour on the image in the top right. This was a really big plant in horticulture until just over a decade ago because of that colour. You bring it in the forest, it's a bit more like the image in the bottom there, a bit paler, but bring it into full sun and it's this bright red or salmon coloured growth. What you might notice, if you can see it on this image, is yellow spotting, and that is myrtle rust when it's starting to hit the leaves. And what this does is just kill all that new growth. And it's been quite devastating on the thready bark myrtle. And so those stunning cultivars that were things like Blushing Beauty and Aurora just aren't really heard of anymore. They've completely gone out of the nursery industry, and they were 2 really stunning little native plants, or good hedge plants. And unfortunately, that one's been hit quite hard. They're actually looking pretty good in Mary Cancross itself, so that there is some hope for this species yet, hopefully. This is a slightly sadder story in Mary Cancross. This is the Blackall Range velvet myrtle. I helped discover this plant in Mary Cancross about 12 years ago. It was the first, even though it's called species Blackall Range, it was the first time it had actually been recorded on top of the range. It's usually in the foothills to the east, Palmwoods, Udalo, and up the coast from there. There were 2 little patches in Mary Cancross which appear to have disappeared completely. We don't seem to be able to pick them up on survey work after that. It is still present in the landscape in other areas. We did take some cutting material from it back 12 years ago, and we do have that material still alive. So there is the potential for reintroducing it back to Mary Cancross in the future, even if it's just in the gardens out the front. But for the time being, it appears to have become extinct in Mary Cancross. You're probably all familiar with macadamias, of course, but this is the Marucci nut. This is the slightly less palatable, poisonous little Marucci nut. It's a much smaller tree, absolutely stunning horticultural specimen, garden specimen, pink flowers, a small nut. That it's basically cyanide that's in the nuts, which is, if you get it in a concentrated enough form, I haven't tried it myself, but if it's in concentrated enough form, it's supposed to taste bitter anyway. There's a good warning. You're not going to accidentally eat these guys, hopefully, unless your taste buds aren't working. So that's quite well spread through Mary Cairncross as well. This is one there's the odd one here and there. It's quite an unusual vine. I've only ever seen a few of these over the years, many years of looking through the rainforest off the range. It is in the cucumber family, or cucumber and pumpkin family, but it can climb all the way to the top of the rainforest, which is probably primarily why we don't recognise it too often, because it's just a thin stem climbing up into the canopy. That's our silky cucumber. This is one you might be more familiar with. It's been a bit of a success story as far as revegetating and bringing plants back into the landscape. It's certainly brought back the Richmond birdwing butterfly. Is certainly in good numbers across the range and across the coast and down towards Brisbane. Was a prolific butterfly in the past historically, but had been really hard hit by major rainforest clearance. This is another interesting one that's only the odd one here and there. I remember walking along the front of Mary Cairncross about 10 years ago with Paul Forster from the Queensland Herbarium, and he was just looking at a vine. He said, wow, that's hasn't been seen here for about 120 years in southeast Queensland. And that was a whole new location for this vine again. Subsequently, we found a few more in Mary Cairncross and other rainforests around the range. This plant is related to something you might be more familiar with, the monkey rope vine that you get a lot on the coast and everywhere else. But quite a large leafed, quite big rampant vine. But yeah, very few and far between. This is the cousin to lomandras, and quite widespread in Mary Cairncross, but very much limited to places like that. Not many of them are anywhere else, but you do get quite a bit in Mary Cairncross and a few other gullies and valleys around the range. There's a little bit here and there. Syzygium hodgkinsoniae, it's one of the less known lily pillies. Very large fruit. This is one of those things that probably harks back to the megafauna that have become extinct in the last tens of thousands of years in the rainforests on the this lower part of the east coast. That fruit is probably anywhere between 40 and 60 millimetres across, and would have been great tucker for a cassowary if they, presuming they lived down this far south, and that was what used to spread them around. Those flowers are huge too. Those stamens are probably about 40, 50 mil long and highly perfumed. You can't miss them. It's a real stunner of a lily pilly. And that, luckily enough, that was probably one of the few plants that we picked up in every single quadrant, every single one of our 28 quadrats in Mary Cairncross. So I think that's the last one. That's some websites. If anybody wants to find out a little bit more about us, Brush Turkey, that's our contracting and wholesale side of things. There's lots of blogs on there, and Forest Heart relates to our retail nursery. It's been a pleasure speaking to you all. I think I'm probably running out of time, and well, let's keep things going this afternoon. It's great to see so many participants. That it's such a full group of people out there. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.